How many of you have seen Back to the Future? Oh, excellent. I was worried that maybe I had been trapped in the 80s and wouldn't be able to give my example properly. Okay, so I want to start by talking about Back to the Future, because Back to the Future is an excellent example of an inconsistent time travel story. And I'm going to tell you guys why. So here's what happens in the movie very, very roughly. At the start of the movie, we're told about this guy, George McFly, who leads a horrible life. So in particular, nobody respects him. Like, he has a horrible boss and so forth. And then his son, Marty, gets into a time machine and travels to the past. And as they put it in the movie, he interferes. So all sorts of weird things happen, including that Marty's mom gets a crush on him. And he's, as the movie portrays it, he's in danger of never being born for that reason. But anyway, he befriends his own father and gives him courage. And then Marty comes back to the future and finds that his dad is respected by everyone. And in fact, the guy who was his horrible boss now works for him, or something like that. Now, here is why the movie is inconsistent. Because there's a particular time in 1985, I forget the exact date, such that at the beginning of the movie, we're told that in 1985, George gets no respect. And then, towards the end of the film, we're told of this same time, we're told that everyone respects George. Now, it doesn't matter whether this statement is made at the beginning of the film and that statement is made at the end of the film. The two statements are still inconsistent. I mean, to see this, suppose that you're on a jury, and at the beginning of his testimony, the witness says that George gets no respect at a certain time, and at the end of his testimony, the witness says that everyone respects George at that same time. Then you would conclude that the witness has contradicted himself. Now, there is an interpretation of the film where it's not inconsistent. The problem is that it's also not about time travel. So on this other interpretation, what happens is not that Marty is traveling through time in our world. What happens instead is that he's traveling across worlds. So what happens is that he goes to the past. So this is our world. That's 1985. And he goes to the past and then interferes. And at that point, he moves to a different world that has a slightly different future. Now, but notice how there's something odd about interpreting the story in that way. Because on that interpretation, the movie is a total downer. So on that interpretation, what happens is that Marty abandons his real family, goes off to a different world filled with copies, and hangs out with his happy copies, where his family, his real family, is sad. In fact, they're probably sadder now that Marty has abandoned them. So on the interpretation that the movie is to be understood not as a world travel story, but as a time travel story, it's inconsistent. So 2 quick exercises for you guys. So I'm going to mention 2 stories, and I want you guys to tell me whether they're consistent or inconsistent. So first story, I'm a terrible gambler, and one morning at the tracks, I feel this feeling, and I decide that I'm going to bet everything on Easy Rider. And I place my bet, and Easy Rider loses by a nose. And so I lose all my savings and lead this life of hardship. But towards the end of my life, an old aunt dies, and she leaves me a time machine. So I go back, and I see my younger self waiting in line to buy the crucial ticket. And then I whisper into his ear, don't bet on Easy Rider. And my younger self acquiesces and never places the bet, and I'm happy thereafter. So consistent or inconsistent?
Inconsistent.
That's right. Okay, second story. It's the eve of your 21st birthday. And the doorbell rings, and a stranger shows up. And they tell you how to build the time machine. So you follow their instructions and build the time machine, and it's awesome. You spend your life traveling through time. And towards the end of your life, once you're old, you go back in time to the eve of your 21st birthday and tell your younger self how to build a time machine. Consistent or inconsistent?
Consistent.
That's right. Weird, but consistent. Okay, the reason it's consistent is because that doesn't happen. So there is no time about which we're first told that one thing happens, and that's later taken back. We're later told that, no, something else happened.